Hi, everybody. This is our week 5 video. I hope everything's been going well for you all, and we're almost a third of the way through the semester, if you can believe it. So let's jump right in with Kimball and Hawkins. Okay, so today's overview in this video, we're going to talk a little bit about the excerpts from chapter 3 that I shared with you, and we'll talk a little bit about chapter 5. I really think this video is going to be shorter than the other ones because in this video, I point you to some other resources that perhaps you'll explore on your own time. We'll see. Okay, so the chapters that you read are from a book called Document Design, A Guide for Technical Communicators. And you know, some people might come at the title of this book and think, oh, wow, that's really boring. I mean, I have the copy of the book, I think right next to me over here. I keep it right next to my desk. It's actually very interesting. And I think document design plays such a crucial role in the actual usability of information that we convey via various kinds of document types. This book is full of all kinds of really useful examples. So Kimball and Hawkins invoke Kenneth Burke's definition of rhetoric as they work to explain visual rhetoric. I mean, that's basically the grounding question of this entire class. What is visual rhetoric? So rhetoric is the use of language as a symbolic means of inducing cooperation. So in a classical rhetorical mode, rhetors are trying to be persuasive with certain interlocutors or with a group comprised of multiple people of many different opinions, their audience, right? So whether it's a one-on-one conversation or debate or a oratory, a speech in front of a larger audience, the baseline goal is to induce the cooperation of the audience, right? If your audience happens to be two children, for example, and you're trying to persuade them to do what you want, you are indeed using tactical or strategic language in order to try to induce them to do the thing that you want them to do, to coerce them into cooperating with you, hopefully through pretty well-reasoned arguments, right? So this could be your children, this could be your colleagues, this could be family members, your students, or maybe somebody who you're interacting with in a professional space, but you are definitely trying to induce cooperation. So that's rhetoric per that definition. So think about how this relates to visual rhetoric. Is it the same, the way that we're using images as a symbolic means of inducing cooperation rather than language, we're using images? So the authors call attention to the fact that the rhetor is concerned with communicating with their audience so as to further their goals. So the intention is for the rhetor to further their own goals, but hopefully this isn't at the expense of the audience's goals. That's kind of outside of the boundaries of the topic today, but I think it's important to think about. So theories of visual perception and theories of visual culture inform visual rhetoric, and effective visual communicators use their understanding of both perception and culture to speak convincingly and effectively to users. Maybe not even to speak, but to use visual information persuasively, and that is the means by which the designer or the rhetor in that case communicates with the audience. So there are these two ideas here: perceptual communication or perceptual theories and cultural theories of visual communication or visual culture. So visual rhetoric applies to the design of more neutral documents, such as manuals, reports, and proposals. Well, visual rhetoric in the context of this book on the screen, Document Design for Technical Communicators, they are not talking about advertising. They're not talking about filmic strategies of persuading or shaping an audience's perspective on the message in a film, for example. In this case, it is quote unquote neutral documents such as manuals, reports, and proposals, but no document is ever neutral. That's something that I repeat to my students all the time. But reports and instruction manuals are also persuasive documents. So if you're giving somebody instructions, you know, in COVID, in the COVID times, there were instructions for washing your hands appropriately everywhere. They hung in my kids' school bathroom. They hung in the bathrooms of the humanities building, which is now being torn down. These visual communications that actually operated in two languages, Spanish and English. So they had visual information and they had textual information. They intended to persuade the viewer to wash their hands in the appropriate manner, following CDC guidelines, because that manner would better eradicate virus and, other contaminants from one's hands. So remember how applicable Aristotelian appeals, ethos, logos, and pathos, are to visual rhetoric of a document, a website, an app, an informational poster, and more. So the example I just gave of the hand washing flyer that was on the wall of the humanities building in the bathroom, it used primarily ethos and logos in order to send its message, but it had this underlying pathos component, which was the desire to have empathy for others and keep them healthy, as a means of not creating additional emotional load through illness, for example. So in that case, that was a technical communication in that it was parlaying or translating technical or scientific information, which was research backed, like what is the best way to wash your hands, into a visual medium, and illustrated instructions, quick start, basically on the wall, in order to persuade the user or the viewer to follow it. But you can see similar techniques. In that case, the pathos was sort of the third in the sort of the triumvirate maybe of appeals that were used there in that particular document. The third most important, and the first two were ethos and logos. Sometimes that's shifted around, such as in certain websites you might visit on a regular basis. So another rhetorical theory the authors write is Burke's, and it applies particularly well. So in addition to the Aristotelian, so the Burkean theory, it applies particularly well to the analysis of visual information. It relies on the pentad, the Burkean pentad, which is act, scene, agent, agency, and purpose. So here's another rather old pharmaceutical advertisement. I had another one in a slide presentation a few weeks ago, but following the example analysis from the book of a Wells Fargo brochure, how do we see act, scene, agent, agency, and purpose operate in this pharmaceutical advertisement? So that is an additional sort of heuristic through which you can analyze this particular piece of persuasive communication, in addition to those appeals of ethos, logos, and pathos. Can you identify all of these act, scene, agent, agency, and purpose here? So through what visual rhetorical elements, the ones that are at work throughout this page, do we see the message constructed in this advertisement? So there is some clear logos-driven appeal here, but there's also this sense of the agent and that agent's agency to but he's no match for something 1/1,000,000th his size, a clot. So it's calling upon this agent in the image to make an agentive decision around his health, to talk to his doctor about Pridclo, I guess is the name of this medicine, because you're no match for a dangerous clot. That again, in this analysis, we can see how we might apply both the Aristotelian appeals and this Burkean pentad in order to better understand the way that this document works in terms of its visual imagery. And then on the other layer that that we would, I guess, extract from the messaging in the book, excuse me, the document design book, is that even the design of the text and the page space and the use of white space and the use of emphasis through bolding and the use of chunked paragraphs, all of that together helps us take away, hopefully, I mean, if the advertising agency in the pharmaceutical industry had their way, we would take a certain message away from this. So does the design of the pharmaceutical advertisement we saw before convey a user-centered visual design, helping the user to fulfill their own needs and agendas? Well, I think there's a bit of friction around that. And there's a whole debate around pharmaceutical advertisements to begin with. But if we think about other documents, not exactly this pharmaceutical advertisement only, but is the design user-centered? And how do user-centeredness and persuasive rhetoric within visual information, how do those things cooperate or conflict with each other? It's really interesting question to ask, but is the user assisted in fulfilling their own needs and agendas? Now, certainly, most people would not want to have a blood clot or have any, negative medical circumstances. And they would, if they could take a medicine that would help them to avoid that, they probably would. But that may not be a need that they had preceding the viewing of this particular image. So in a way, they're trying to anticipate the inherent desire on the part of the viewer to be healthy. And it's only through that anticipated need or anticipated or like telegraphing of what a viewer might want that the service to the user is done. But if the user then has their interest piqued, then they look in the advertisement, and are they then able to get the information they need in a pretty usable fashion? If we looked back at that ad, we would say, okay, yeah, they can see like how it operates. They can see the sort of like logos driven technical diagrams of the clot and what this medicine is supposed to do to prohibit the formation. And so that's more on the more technical side of things, but it also has this emotional appeal of this man who contrasted with this very tiny clot. He's a big man, but still he is not strong enough to defeat this. So in that sense, the agenda of the viewer would be to protect themselves from a similar scenario. So how can a better understanding of what our users' needs are help us shape the design of our document? One really important facet of that is, where was this advertisement originally circulated? Was it in a magazine like Men's Health? Was it in a magazine like Time magazine, back when people used to buy hard copy magazines and they would read them in the waiting room of the doctor's office, or wherever they happened to be waiting? The DMV, before the era of scrolling on phones. So were they an audience in a necessarily distracted state? That's something that Berger was talking about, which we talked about a few weeks ago. So are we able to anticipate how to engage the audience, a necessarily distracted audience, through document design techniques? They will just totally skip past our content, whether it's a report, a white paper, an instruction set, a memorandum, or a standard operating procedure, if it is not effectively designed to grip them, to hold their attention. And their needs can thereby be served through effective document design and the employment of visual strategies, visual communication strategies in an appropriate and strategic fashion. So here are a few examples, and I shared these with my Finnish students. These came from, first one on the left is the Better Business Bureau. And then on the right, we have the Occupational Safety and Health Association. And this one on the right is a way to file a complaint, a health complaint. You can see that, how to file a whistleblower complaint. And then on the left, we see the Better Business Bureau, again, filing a complaint against a business. If you might encounter a problem in a business, a local business, you can seek redress, perhaps through filing a complaint through the Better Business Bureau, and at least getting some, having the business face some sort of consequence. Now, these forms are designed for just the citizenry, right? So they have to anticipate maybe users doing this for the first time, because I don't imagine many people file multiple Better Business Bureau complaints or multiple safety and health complaints year over year. They might have a series of them done at a similar time, particularly with an OSHA complaint. But I think some people in this class might have more knowledge about this than I do. But in the case of the design of the web pages related to filing those complaints, you need to ask questions of yourself in the context of this class about how these particular pages are designed to anticipate the user's questions and to facilitate their end goal, which is successfully filing this complaint and getting some sort of response or some feeling of satisfaction as a result of having been in a situation where they felt dissatisfied that they needed to file a complaint. So we see lots of things that precipitate engagement. Like we have these clickable circles over here on the left. Over here on the right, we have these hyperlinks that people can click and phone numbers to help them get to the particular office that they need. We also have really strategic use of certain semiotic signs, which we've talked about in previous weeks. We also have balance, contrast, enclosure. A lot of the visual theories that we've studied are represented here in these two web pages, just as examples. Now, here are two Finnish examples, because as I said, I'm not taking them out of the presentation because I thought you might like to see them. So the one on the left is for Elovena. They are an oats company. They sell oatmeal, they sell oat biscuits, and they are celebrating their 100th anniversary. This is the landing page of their website as of this spring. That's kind of an unconventional landing page. It has the menu at the top, and then it has the message at the bottom that it's their 100th anniversary. But it has this sort of very coherent page design that is in using these images to tell a story or to share a feeling about this company. It is very aesthetically powerful, and it uses this repeated iconography of wheat throughout to also send this message about almost, I mean, there's 3 different women, actually 4 different women depicted. There's actually maybe more now that I look at it up close, but there's 3 women that you can easily see. But why is that used to send the message about this company? So how do we create a page design and organize content in a visual field? So we see 2 different ways of doing that represented on the screen. You can use strategies that rely upon your user's perception. You can use strategies that are necessarily trying to persuade through textual or visual means, or you can rely on sort of common parlance vis-a-vis their cultural situatedness. So the one on the left specifically draws upon values of the culture in which it exists. Now, the one on the right, if you didn't know it, you might not think there's anything like distinctively Finnish about this. This is a national parks brochure. This is like a PDF. It's not that different from the way government bodies and, National Park Service may operate in other countries. They're drawing attention to this nature reserve, Aulanko, and they have a little image of the country of Finland up on the right and the really important takeaway information there, like when it was established and where it is located. You can see that both textually and on the map as it's identified. This image of these people on the mountain bikes gives you a suggestion of what you can do there. But there's nothing like necessarily Finnish about the page on the right. Whereas on the landing page of the website on the left, there are some things that are more reliant on culture than they are reliant on perhaps rhetorical tactics or strategies that necessarily deal with some of these perceptual theories, although a little bit more in that vein. But you could make a case for the existence of all 3 of those facets. Now, since there is a chance that this highlights video will be standing in for a group 3 video, because as of the filming of this, nobody had signed up, I have a bunch of questions, and I'm going to pick some of these questions as the ones that I would leave with this video if I posted it in the discussion board for you to remark on. So I'm just going to read through them for you here before we conclude this video. So what cultural factors can you see impacting the design of a common document, like something that you use often? I'd really love to hear you enumerate those. Can you find examples of how page design can help to establish ethos? You can even click back to the examples that I showed earlier in this video. I think that's pretty clearly evident. So following an idea from page 122, is page design nearly always subordinate to textual content and technical and professional communication outputs? I have an idea on that. As Kimball and Hawkins write, some, quote, attitudes suggest that the meaning we gain from visual cues is a mere adjunct or shell to the words themselves. Like it only exists to hold the words. I'm not sure I agree with that, but I'm really interested to see what you think. So good design, an effective relationship between design objects, creates meaning. So these design objects are connection, hierarchy, sequence, and balance. Do you know what these are? So can you find examples of them in a government website or PDF? So do you see evidence of grid layouts and within them alignment, enclosure, similarity, contrast, proximity, and order? And the examples I've already used in this slide presentation, can you go back and see some of those features? Now, the final thing is I found this 2020, the state of the DOE national laboratories, because I'm always interested in finding examples that somehow relate to Sandia National Laboratories. In fact, that's what brought my family to New Mexico way back many decades ago, was my dad's work sort of proximate to Sandia. And a lot of our technical writing students end up going to work at Sandia or Los Alamos. So I'm really interested in looking at the textual outputs that they create. But this one was outsourced. It was created in collaboration with a company called Bioscience Communications, and you can look them up and see what they do. I did. So here's a sample US government annual report that demonstrates many of the document design principles Kimball and Hawkins discuss. So I have the links here, both to this report and to the Bioscience Communications company. And their job is to help create these kinds of government reports. That is their specialty. So I would love for you to visit mostly this report and just click through it and see how many of these document design practices are reflected in this report. So I will share these links below the video, and hopefully you'll take a look at them. But that is the end of this week's video. It was pretty quick and easy this week, I think. So have a great rest of your week.